what breaks. All right, so I think we'll get started. Can everyone hear? Okay. Can someone post in the answers? Okay, good. So my name is Brian Hughes. I have a business here in town called Rattlesnake Solutions. If you're here, then you are somewhere in our sphere of uh, of conversation. Maybe you're invited here, or you follow our page, or something like that. But in Phoenix and Tucson and around Arizona, what we do is we go help people with rattlesnake problems. So if you get a snake in your yard, we go and catch it. You can keep it out, install like snake fencing and a lot of different things. But the really interesting thing about that, to me, is that as much as we really like snakes and like learning about snakes, we really get a good view of the other side of this. Is that every time we see a snake, we tend to we're meeting people that really don't like snakes, or they don't like snakes, and they also maybe don't even like us because we are in league with the snakes in a little bit. So lots of stories, lots of misinformation, lots of things that really show that the general knowledge base out there about rattlesnakes and why people fear them so much, why our culture fears them so much, why theirs are so such a prevalent thing. So we're just going to keep this pretty informal today. Not going to give a presentation. I got some questions from the internet off of Facebook. People were leaving them in comments, and some people emailed them to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run down those. I'll answer one or two, and then I'll jump onto the Q&A on Zoom and answer some of those, and we'll just do that until we run out. If we get a couple of questions that are similar, I already see a few of them that are kind of like, what do you do if you see a snake when you're hiking? I'll just skip that unless there's something about that wasn't answered, then you can just leave it in the QA. My cup's backwards. Error number 1. Okay, so the first question that I got emailed, it's from Ellen, and she says she has areas on her property that need to have kindling or flammable plant material removed. What tips can you provide on letting the snakes know that I'm going to start work and to slither away? And I think about that every day because I see people clearing out all the globe chamomile and all the nasty stuff that's out there. And there are snakes, they're not really necessarily hiding in it, but around the edges of it. And yeah, people are going to encounter snakes. Anyone that's working in that capacity is going to run into that. So to answer that, what can you do to scare them away? So sounds aren't going to do it. So rattlesnakes do not have, or any snakes don't have external ears. So they can sense vibrations to some degree, but whether or not that's going to get them to crawl away is another thing. Really, if you're looking at their stress response and their defensive response, if a snake is scared or feels something that could harm it, its first reaction is often to just stay put and hide. So if you do something to cause a vibration to try to scare the snakes away, what you could also be doing is getting them to hunker down and stay in there. You can do some other things. You might be able to spray the area with a hose or something like that. I've seen people use take a like an air blower or something through the area just to see if you can get one up. But there's really not a lot you can do in that area. Just be careful. Maybe do it midday so it's hot and the snakes are less likely to be out and active. Okay, so the second one that I was emailed from Gino is, do rattlesnakes hide in leaves? They do. Yep. Basically anytime, any place that can give them adequate cover or shade or to get out of the heat, snakes can hide in. So there's times that they'll be down in the leaves. All right, I'll grab one off of the Q&A thing here and try this out. So Andre is asking, well, he says he's from Europe and they travel to the US, especially Florida and Arizona. And he wants to come and look for rattlesnakes here to photograph and wants to know the best time of day and the time of year. There's no good answer to that. It really depends on what you're looking for and what you're looking for it to do. So obviously the summer is going to be better. In general, and this would apply to Florida as well, I'm sure, is you want to avoid times of year that are exceptionally hot and dry. So don't plan a trip to look for rattlesnakes in June. It's not going to work out that great. And the monsoon here is a great time. People travel here from all over the world to look at snakes, and that's when we have a lot of time to do it too. But you can find them any time of year. When a lot of the people that work with us and our friends that are other snake nerds, the time of year that we really start looking for snakes is January. As soon as the new year starts, we are looking for our first snakes of the year. It's more difficult. You're less likely to just bump into one. So if I was planning a trip to see a snake, it would be sometime around the monsoon. Okay. So in email, Trudy asked what to do if you're bitten on a hike. And actually, we got several questions about this. So what happens if you're out on a trail and you are bitten by a rattlesnake? And I'm going to separate this into two answers because there's also a lot of questions here about what happens if you're bitten at home or just in general, or if a kid is bitten, or all these different scenarios. The fortunate thing is that there is a simple answer to that. You call 911. That's it. You are probably have been raised with any number of home remedies or internet solutions or things that you heard from your grandpa or a neighbor or even people that you should trust with information about being outdoors, a park ranger or a Cub Scout leader or someone that works with snakes. But none of those things are meaningful. None of them really work. What you need to do is get to a hospital. The only thing that's going to meaningfully affect a rattlesnake bite is to have a doctor treat that and give antivenom and watch what happens and treat what happens. I'm not a doctor, so always do what your doctor says over anything I say. But if anything that you think would help a little bit, none of it's going to help as much as calling 911. If that starts bringing off a list of well, should I hike down the trail or should I get to the parking lot? I would call 911 and ask that person, and they will tell you what you should do. If you're at home, same situation. I really don't like a lot of the lists that I see that are like, here's what you do if you're bitten by a rattlesnake, and it lists 5 or 6 things, because usually call for help is down near the bottom somewhere after a bunch of really superficial stuff. You can remove the jewelry you have because it's going to swell, try to remain calm, things like that. But ultimately what you need to do is get help. And if you're out hiking and you're in a place where you don't have cell phone service, then you need to get to a place that has cell phone service. Or if you're with somebody, you send them to go get help to get cell phone service. And really most places that people hike, especially around the valley where the majority of people hike, it's really not that hard to find a bar, or to send someone to the top or hike calmly down the trail. You don't want to take shortcuts off road. You don't want to run back to the car and get your heart rate up and then try to drive yourself to the hospital. It's not going to make a difference whether you go for a helicopter ride from the mountain or a helicopter ride from the trailhead. You're going for a helicopter ride. So call 911 as soon as you possibly can. That usually goes into a line of questions about, well, what if I'm way off trail and I don't have any way of getting help, or I'm so far off trail and nobody knows where I'm at. I have no way of contacting anybody. I don't have any emergency plan whatsoever. There's not a lot you can do. And I can't tell you that there's any, special rubbing on your leg that's going to help anything. I can say that in those situations, then a rattlesnake bite is not necessarily more deadly than a broken leg or a fall or any other type of accident. The solution there is if you put yourself in those situations, you should be planning for it. You should have somebody that's expecting you at a certain time, or you should be getting a spot device or a GPS or, planning ahead. That's how it goes. If you're at home, same thing. Just call 911. That's it. You're going to live if you're in Arizona. I think the last person that actually died from a rattlesnake bite in Arizona was in 2014, and she also had some other problems and some heart conditions. So it's something that is exceptionally survivable, especially here in Arizona, where we have more rattlesnakes than anywhere, more diversity than anywhere. It's the fastest growing area in the country, and still deaths don't really happen. So try to keep calm. Remember that the math is overwhelming in your favor, and call 911 and and do whatever they say. Hopefully that answers that. So if there's some nuance to that that you want to know about, ask a question about it, and I'll get to that when I can. All right, let me see what's next. I'm kind of keeping an eye on chat a little bit, but any questions you should put in the Q&A. I'm a little new to this format, so I'll be slow. Okay, another one from Trudy. What can we do to help our dog if she's bitten out on a hike? So the first thing you should do is prevention. Okay, so we did something where we used to do dog training, avoidance training. we no longer do that. We have there's a great company in town called Rattlesnake Ready. They do dog training. They do it so well that we decided to not do it anymore. We saw how, they're very, very good at it. So I would, rattlesnakeready.com. I'll check them out if you want to have your dog aversion trained. But really, dogs they tend not to be bitten on the paws or on the belly. I mean, they do, but it's not where most bites occur. Most dogs are bitten on the nose when they go run in to check it out. So if you're on a hike and your dog is bitten, very often it's off leash. We put out some polls to veterinarians and people whose dogs have been bitten. We got a lot of responses where we wanted to figure out where dogs get bitten. How does this happen as a first step in this, process of keeping your dog safe? And it turns out, we were expecting a little bit of a difference between dogs that are on and off leash, but it turns out that keeping your dog on leash on a trail eliminates almost all possibility of being bitten. It still can happen, but what normally happens when dogs are bitten is that the dog sees the snake and the dog goes in to get it. And if you don't have a leash, you're powerless to stop that. You may believe that your dog has perfect recall and is very well trained. When I'm doing my work in the Phoenix Preserve, I'm often sneaking around looking for snakes and people don't see me. And I've seen dogs run away from their owners and get tangled up in cactus and run into the freeway and all kinds of things. It's just not, it's an overestimation of your relationship with the dog in a lot of cases. So if you want to keep your dog safe, get them aversion trained with somebody that's reputable to do it, and use a leash. If your dog is bitten by a dog, or if your dog's bitten by a dog, I don't know much about that, but if a dog is bitten by a snake, you should enact the plan that you've put in place in advance. And that means that you have contacted a 24-hour veterinary hospital that treats rattlesnake bites. You know exactly what to do and have their contact information, and you have that information on your phone already, and you take care of it. If this is something that you do, if you hike with your dog, or have a dog in a place where rattlesnakes are, you should get that plan in place as soon as possible, because that makes a huge difference. There's no first aid that you're going to give that dog. I see a lot of, especially in the last year, a lot of advice, people saying give Benadryl to both people and dogs. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a vet, but every specialist that I've asked this question to or asked for a quote from that works as an EMT or a vet or a venom specialist, someone that actually designs protocols for treatment of rattlesnake bites in people, says that giving Benadryl up front just by yourself and hoping it does something is a very bad idea. Doesn't mean they don't give you Benadryl or something at the hospital. Different situation. So if your dog is bitten, take your dog to the emergency vet. It's pretty much as simple as that. And then the last one from Trudy is, how likely is death from a bite for humans and dogs? Humans, it's exceptionally unlikely. So in Arizona, every year you have average 0 deaths. A few hundred bites, 0 deaths. So the math is in your favor. If you are bitten and trying to stay calm, remember that as it's gonna be bad, it's gonna hurt, it's gonna be expensive, but you're going to live. Okay. Dogs don't do as well. Dogs are smaller, they get bit on the face. They die a lot more. So everything you can possibly do to try to keep your dog from being bitten in the first place, and then having an airtight plan in case that happens, really does a lot to affect that. While I'm on the topic of dogs, I'm going to talk about the booster. There is a vaccine. I used to just stay away from this entirely. If someone asked me about the rattlesnake vaccine, if you give it to your dog or not, again, I'm not a vet, but I would not give it to my dog. The reason I would not give it to my dog is because there is not conclusive evidence that it works enough to convince me that it does. If you asked 10 doctors, you're going to get 5 of them, or 10 vets, you're going to get 5 that say it works and 5 that say it doesn't. But there is there are multiple instances that have been published that show that some dogs, after they've been bitten, show an allergic response to the venom that is similar as if they've been bitten before. And the reason for that, they believe, was the booster. Also, the terminology is very bad. It's called a vaccine. And I know of several cases where dogs have actually died because what is a vaccine? A vaccine is something you take and then you're immune to it. Where people get a shot of something, they don't fully understand what it is, then they believe that their dog is immune to rattlesnake bites. And then their dog dies because they wait until morning. That's happened a few times. Just from, those are anecdotes from our time answering a lot of phone calls from people with snakes. So yeah, do what your vet says ultimately. But for me, for my dog, I would not give my dog the booster. So let's see. I'm going to take one from the Q&A. Thank you, Nancy. I identified a gopher snake in your yard. We get a lot of identification requests for gopher snakes. Okay, so Thomas is asking if I've ever run across the physician who had a TV show, Venom ER. Yes, I have. His name is Dr. Sean Bush. He is a emergency treatment specialist at Loma Linda University in California. And I had the pleasure of meeting him at the Venomous Herpetology Symposium a couple years ago, where I was a speaker, and was very pleased when he came up to me afterwards and told me it was my talk on rattlesnake relocation was the best that he's seen on the topic. So that was very, very happy about that. He's a great guy. He helps a lot of people. He's a really good guy. Okay, so Neil is saying, oh, that's a technical thing. He's in, but he can't hear anything. Sorry. I turned my mic on. Okay, I'm just gonna scroll down until I see a question. Okay. Best practice, this comes from Adrienne. Best practice if you get struck on trail, far from trailhead or a mountain bike, and don't have a cell signal or safety. That's kind of one I covered already, but I'm gonna add something to it that I've been trying to work with, is that satellite phones and satellite devices are cheap now. 10 years ago, they were not. But if you spend some serious time away from cell phone reception, like a lot of us like to, for under $500, you can get a good, reliable device that can get you help from anywhere in the world. Okay, I've had a couple of those that I've used to some success. Don't take them to China. They steal them from you. I learned that the hard way. But on our trip to Peru recently, Jill, who works with us, she's a snake prevention specialist that works with on the snake fencing side. A lot of you probably met her. She brought her satellite phone that she brought, so we could check in on our baby and feel okay for being in the Amazon and not being able to be contacted for a while. So those are great things to have. If you have any preparation that you do, I would include that. Okay, another one from the email or Facebook. Heidi's asking, she says she's new to Arizona and loves to be outdoors. Oh, I should have read this one first. That's another one about what to do if you're bitten. Hopefully I've covered that pretty well. Kids, it's the same thing. If they're young kids, try to just get them to a hospital as quick as you can, by any means. It's going to be scary, but they'll most likely live. Okay, so here's one from Gary. And Gary, he is a guy that I've spoken to before, and he's knowledgeable about desert wildlife and those guided hikes and a few things. And one of the interesting things, a story that he shared with me, he sent me some pictures of a time that he was in the McDowell Mountains in Scottsdale, and there's a little place that's like a little geocache type area, and somebody flipped over a tin and there was a black-tailed rattlesnake there. Actually, I have a picture of that. I'm going to show you that picture. Let's see if I know how to do that. It's about a 50-50 chance of me actually knowing how to do this. So let's see how that goes. Anyway, there was a black-tailed rattlesnake that was, here it is. Okay. That was under some stuff, and whoever was there actually touched it, and the snake did not strike at him, didn't really react to him in any way. And Gary was asking, why didn't it bite him? What happened? Why wasn't there a big response from this rattlesnake? So the answer to that is one that differs from a lot of people's experience with rattlesnakes, is that the snake just didn't care to. It wasn't that threatened by him, or if it was threatened by him, it felt that the best course of action was to stay put and be hidden and that kind of thing. So that's a pretty common response. Most of the time when someone sees a rattlesnake, or I guess when a rattlesnake sees a person, it's just sitting there. Their first response most often is just to stay still and not be detected. That's actually one of the things when you see people, there's a snake crossing a trail and it's halfway through and it's just stopped and people say, oh, look, it's sunning. Most likely it's not. That snake probably was crossing the trail and then saw the person and stopped, hoping that the predator, the hiker, would go away. From the snake's perspective, a monster appears on the horizon and makes a beeline towards them, and then they start to rattle when they get there. So what Gary saw in this case, even though he even touched the snake, was the actual default behavior of rattlesnakes. Most hikers have a different experience with that, and most of the time it's because the snakes tend to find us at the same time. Most hikers have an experience where almost all rattlesnakes they see rattle. So it's, it doesn't mean that rattlesnakes everywhere rattle. Most of them are not rattling. You pass by lots of them that just didn't. So you notice 100% of the rattlesnakes that you notice. You notice 0% of the rattlesnakes that you don't. So your perspective might be different. So Gary, that was a beautiful blacktail, and that's pretty much how that should go. All right. I'm gonna take another one from Q&A. So what precautions can you take while hiking? This is a little bit different than the other answers. What happens if you're bitten? If you don't want to be bitten by a rattlesnake when you're hiking, the best thing you can do is keep your eyes open. Watch the trail ahead of you. Just make sure that you're being aware of your surroundings. You can wear protective gear if you like. If you're on the trail, the odds of being bitten are pretty low. If you're hiking around in rocks and you're putting hands in places that you can't see, then it goes up a little bit. Likewise, if you're hiking in places and putting your feet in places that you can't see, your odds of being bitten go up as well. So if I were hiking in a place that I could be bitten by a rattlesnake, or I know that I wouldn't be able to see the ground clearly all the time, loose pants are great. People love to hike in shorts. It's cool. It's not as cool as you think it is. If you want to test that out, if you want to see what, when I hike in the heat, it's 115 degrees outside, looks like I'm wearing armor. I've got long sleeves on, face and head all covered up, big, heavy jeans and boots. And if you want to take the skin temperature of what my arm is versus someone that is hiking in a tank top, you would see exactly why that's the case. So, get some pants, get some heavy pants. And it's not that they can't bite through jeans, they can, but it can make it so that less venom goes into the actual tissue, especially if they're loose jeans. If you have baggy pants on, the snake can bite at you, and there's a chance that a lot of the venom, or most of the venom, or all of the venom, would end up in the loose folds of the pants and not in your skin. So that's a really easy one. High boots, I wear 8-inch hiking or hunting boots all the time. It's not the kind of thing you want to go running on a trail in, but if I'm stomping around in deep grass looking for rattlesnakes in a place that I know is full of rattlesnakes, because that's why I'm there, then yeah, I'm going to wear protection. I also wear some leggings that work for that too. And then of course, the biggest precaution you can do is just make sure you're aware of how to get help. I do that for bees a lot. When I'm hiking this morning, for instance, at 5 o'clock this morning, I was hiking in this little slot canyon looking for rattlesnakes as part of our research project. And there's a place that I know there's a few beehives in there. I took a quick note to look to make sure I had cell phone service. I did. I had one bar. And then I also took a quick look at a map to make sure that if I needed to get out of there, I had a couple of options for routes. And then I would go. I do that all the time. Just kind of being aware of my surroundings and just making sure that If I need help, then it's something I can get. That's the best thing, is to try to prevent problems, then um, deal with them later. So another question from Gary is, which things can you use to tell a Western Diamondback rattlesnake from a Mojave rattlesnake? So there's a lot of this. This can be a difficult thing to answer because um, you'll see a lot of things online that are like guides on how to tell one from another. Really, the ultimate thing that you can do is to look at the overall appearance of the snake. There's lots of little clues. One of the things you can look at, I think I actually have some pictures of this. I'm not going to hunt for them right now, but is the tail banding can help. A Western Diamondback tends to have thicker black bands, where it's kind of a 50-50 ratio of white to black, where a Mojave rattlesnake tends to have much more narrow black bands. But that's not an absolute thing too. Every single day people that misidentify both species because of looking at that one thing. Another thing is that if you get, the scales on the top of the head between the, I guess on here will be these two, on a Mojave rattlesnake, they typically have 2 of them, where a Western Diamondback might have 4 or more. But likewise, I see people misidentify those as well, because sometimes Mojave has 3 of those, or 4, or 1 is missing. Black-tailed rattlesnakes have 2 scales right in front of those that are big scales that people mistake for that all the time, because it's not a pairwise comparison between a Mojave and a Diamondback. So one of the best things you can do if you want to learn how to identify those is to join an identification group. We have one. There's lots of others too. And just look at them. Spend a lot of time looking at those different snakes, and you will start to see that the overall appearance of those animals is actually quite different. And at the beginning, you won't be able to tell the difference between them at all. But after some time, they will stand out like night and day. The thing of the scales between the eyes, for people that are not snake enthusiasts, this is what I don't like about that method and why people throw it out there so often. Most people that don't know the difference between a Mojave and a Diamondback already are not getting close enough to count the supraocular scales on the head of the rattlesnake. So it is not a useful indicator. It's not super useful. So if someone that's just hiking that isn't interested in rattlesnakes is asking how to tell the difference, I don't tell them about the scales. Give them some generalization, tell them some pictures, and advise on some books, maybe something like that. Okay. I'll take another one from email. We have a few more of those. This is from Cheryl. She says, over a week ago, we had a rattlesnake near our front door in the evening, and I was almost bitten. She lives in Scottsdale. We left the snake alone, and in the morning it was gone, and we haven't seen it since. So the question is the snake still likely living near or on the property? And do rattlesnakes just pass through yards? So possibly yes, and also maybe. So there's lots of stuff there. This is a good thing for homeowners to look at. Okay, when a rattlesnake is on your property, it is there for a reason. That's always the case, right? The snake it's not a thing that just kind of happens. There's a reason for it. It is very important to try to determine the reason that the snake is there. This is one of the really key aspects of our service when we're doing rattlesnake relocation, is that we are looking at the rattlesnake. It is not the problem to fix. It is a symptom of what the problem is. So if there's a rattlesnake on the property, if there are things on the property, let's say that at Cheryl's house there was a compost heap that some rodents came and went from, or there was a bird bath or a bird block or a bird's nest, something like that, something that's a goodie or a treat, or something that is a place to hide or shade, something that they can hide in from the heat of the summer, a place they can get a drink, a pool, something like that. Then yes, the snake might be there on purpose. It's something that would be attracting snakes and other animals to that property. So in that case, the snake might not live there, but the snake has probably been there before. That house is one stop on many that create its home range. When I talk about home range, their home range is kind of like, what your day is like. If you're driving to work and then you have to stop at the grocery store on the way home, or go pick up dinner somewhere, that's your home range. Those are things you typically do. You live in one area, you sleep here, you eat over here, maybe over here, or this place is good, and then you go, do something else over here, and you switch around a lot. that's kind of what rattlesnakes do too. So if you have something on your property that offers a chance of success in hunting or staying cool or something like that, then the odds of that snake incorporating that into its home range and also showing up again are much higher than the alternative, which was asking if they just pass through. Yeah, they pass through a lot. Um, so let's say that your neighbor is the one that has the bird block, and you're the one that lives between the edge of the wall and his house. All the rattlesnakes that are going to show up at his house to eat his birds are going to go through your yard. So that happens a lot. In fact, one of our clients that we've had for I've been inspecting his property, or one of us has been inspecting the property every 2 weeks for 8 years now. And it's because he lives between open desert and a golf course that's watered. Nothing on his property is really great for rattlesnakes, but it's like a highway. They just go back and forth on it. And he can't do anything about it because the golf course is not going to go away. They're not going to stop watering grass, and the desert isn't going away. Well, there's state land there, so apparently it will at some point, which kind of brings to the other reason a rattlesnake could be there. Construction and changes to the environment. So when an area is dug up, let's say there's a new block of homes going up, the rattlesnakes that are living there are displaced. So they are either killed outright during the construction, or they flee and they head out into the neighborhoods, and people encounter them that way. A lot of times we can find rattlesnakes in those situations, and we know that, I call them panic snakes is what I call them, because they're clearly not there because they want to be. They are adult rattlesnakes that are scrunched up in the last little bit of shade, nearly dead or dying. And across the street, there's a bunch of bulldozers going off. Those snakes are just basically pushed there. So that means that if there's construction, or even something that's relatively minor, like a neighbor has an old shed that gets torn down, that's going to change the dynamic of the area. The home ranges of the snakes that use those areas is going to be affected, and you have a higher chance of seeing those snakes. It's not just that they get displaced then, it's that snakes that rely on the area that are not even there will also be displaced. So if a construction project happens over the summer, and that construction displaces or removes a site that is known as a winter den, or removes a bunch of pack rat nests for rattlesnakes, then you can expect that in October at some point, all those rattlesnakes that are coming back to that to find that known area that they're going to spend the winter, they're not going to find it. So they have to duck into the closest place that they can, or they'll try to use whatever they can. And there's also more encounters there. So we actually co-authored a paper using our data on removals, the gentleman from New Mexico a few years ago, on these hotspots and how they pop up and disappear, and how development affects this. And it turns out that every time that you start doing a new construction project like that, it can take around 3 years for that process to really even out, for all the snakes to either have adjusted to that or died, or anything that's going to happen for things to kind of hit an equilibrium. So there are a lot of different reasons that that snake could have been in Cheryl's yard. And to just look at it can be difficult to tell, but any of those things can be. A snake can live in the yard, and they can also be passing through. So that was a big one, but there's a lot to it about why a snake is there, and that's why I'll leave it with this too. This is why you want to have somebody. We do this work. There's a number of Arizona Herpetological Association, the Phoenix Herpetological Sanctuary. They do that work well too, and they do a very good job at it. You want to use somebody that knows about snakes more than a friendly neighbor. And the reason for that is being able to identify what those things are and those reasons, and the likely reason that that snake is there to begin with, is the key potentially to you not seeing another snake. So, all right, let's see. For avid hikers, this is from Neil. Do snake gaiters really work? I hope so. I wear them when I'm doing work. I've never had the opportunity to test them, so I'm going to try to keep that in the case. But let's say that they work half the time. I will take that. If they work 10% of the time, sure, I'll still wear them. They're also cactus proof. I hike in a lot of cat claw and stuff, so I really like my snake gaiters for that reason. So if you have some, they're a little hot, but wear them. They're good. Okay. from email, Nancy is asking, are there any plants that snakes find unpleasant that can be used around my back door? It's a lot of, let's see. She says she's seeing a lot of snakes. So this one's kind of funny. So there is only one plant that is reported, I guess rumored, to repel rattlesnakes and keep them away, that snakes don't like. And that's rosemary. The problem, and I see that all the time, people recommend that all the time. And people have spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars planting rosemary all over their yard to get rattlesnakes away. The problem is that rosemary attracts rattlesnakes. It doesn't work at all to repel them. It is amazing habitat for rattlesnakes, and they flock to it and they stay there. The reason for that is the same as why lantana is also just a rattlesnake magnet, because they're very leafy. They have a lot of material. They tend to shed that material very often, and also their maintenance. Rosemary bushes and lantana bushes tend to be overwatered and under-maintained, meaning that the bottom layer, if you have a rosemary bush that, like a hedge of it, that's 5 feet tall and it's been there for 20 years, underneath it is a tangled mass of rotted material. It almost is like clay, rodent burrows, tunnels that go under the root system. It's just an amazing place for rattlesnake prey to live and breed, and also for rattlesnakes to go there. They can stay in it during the winter. They can estivate in it during the summer. They can find food there. There's moisture there. There's all the good stuff that snakes have. At the moment, we can find no plants that actually repel rattlesnakes. What does repel rattlesnakes is the sun. So if you have plants that don't offer shade, that don't create those opportunities that plants like rosemary and lantana and unkept plants tend to, then rattlesnake has no use for it. There's no thermoregulatory opportunity at that plant. So, cactus are great. Cactus, as long as there aren't pack rats in the bottom of them. Anything that can be cut up off the ground. So that's the first thing I was looking at. There's really nothing that would repel the snakes. I'm gonna add something, my own note to that too. And I'm gonna try to find something here if I can. So there are no chemicals or products that do that are going to repel rattlesnakes either, which is a bummer, because that's how I pay my bills, and our crew pays their bills, is to keep rattlesnakes out of people's yards. So if there was a chemical, if Snake Away or any snake repellents worked, I would be so excited. I would be selling it left and right. I'd be recommending everybody. It would be a big thing. The problem with the stuff that's there is that I have found far too many rattlesnakes in yards that have it all over the place. I have found rattlesnakes sleeping on top of it. We have found rattlesnakes sleeping in and amongst mothballs, rattlesnakes sleeping inside empty bags of this stuff. I'm going to show a cool picture. This is not a posed picture. This is one of our guys a few years ago, I think 2015. Somebody bought a ton of this snake repellent, put it all over his property. These bags aren't opened yet. He bought so much, it was a multi-day job, but it was all over. And what they did provide was shade. And overnight, a rattlesnake moved into the bags of Snake Away. So he pulled one of the bags away so we can catch the snake. And I'm thankful that he was smart enough to take the picture of this picture as a completely unposed natural photograph of, I guess, the single answer to does Snake Away and repellents like that work. It does not. If you have a pest control guy that is selling it to you, stop that service. You can keep the pest control guy. What I find in that is that most of the time they don't really know that it doesn't work. It's not like they're trying to put one over on you. They just don't, there's a bunch of stuff there's manufacturers that call us and say, hey, we want to sell this stuff to you for your customers. And then we know it doesn't work. So we say no, because we have experience with that. So a lot of the pest control guys can't. However, we do run into some pest control guys that know it doesn't work and will sell it to you. And I personally don't like that and find it extremely unethical and dangerous because it gives people a false sense of security. People put this stuff in their yard, and then their kids are running around without shoes. They don't check for things. They're not using flashlights at night. They're not doing the things that you should be doing if you live in an area where rattlesnakes could be. So yeah, snake away doesn't work. Smells like a cat litter box. Don't waste your money on it. Okay, so I'm going to go down. So I'm being asked if they can sense fear. They cannot. So the rattlesnakes have no evolutionary past with humans. There's nothing that we can give off that a rattlesnake could detect and interpret as fear or otherwise. Our presence, our movements, those things, they can certainly be scared of us or feel something about us, but it's, if they were able to sense our intention, I wouldn't be rattled. I love rattlesnakes. I wouldn't be rattled at or struck at by as many of them. I have lots of rattlesnakes that try to bite me every day that I, if I need, I'll take care of them very well, and they still want to kill me. So they don't understand this at all. Leslie is asking, have we heard of a rattlesnake entering a house through a doggy door? Yes, I have, one time. It doesn't happen very much. Rattlesnakes don't tend to be inside homes very often, for whatever reason. They don't really like it. It happens, but in most cases, when we find a rattlesnake that's inside of a house, it happens just a few times a year. It's for a very obvious reason. Something like, we just moved here from the Midwest, and there, when you have a nice spring day, you leave the back door open, and we did that here in Scottsdale. We had a rattlesnake in our yard. That's how Joe Arparo's wife was bitten. The back door was open. Something obvious like that. There's been a couple of houses that I've been to that I was very surprised that anybody was living in there. They were pretty shockingly, there was a lot of animals living in there. We'll put it that way. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in those homes. One house where somebody, was doing construction, and the house just didn't have a wall for a winter. Yeah, a rattlesnake moved in while he was gone. So things like that. But if you're at home and a rattlesnake comes in, it does happen. It's pretty rare. Other types of snakes will come right in. Night snakes, long-nosed snakes, king snakes, gopher snakes. Those guys, once a day, we get a call for a snake in one of those places. Okay. Looking for more questions here. Okay, Jim is asking, well, I think it's JM. What should I do if I have a rattlesnake moving towards my garage in the evening? I'm afraid it will get into the garage or the backyard before I can have someone come out to relocate it. The best thing to do, just close the door if you can. If there's one out there and it's moving towards you, they're not very fast. Close the garage door, close the gate. If your gate is such that a rattlesnake could crawl right under it, we can help with that. It goes into your preparation. There's rattlesnake barriers that we can help with in those situations. If it does get into one of those areas, don't try to do it yourself. Okay. So when you see a video of somebody that is experienced with handling a rattlesnake, pick up a snake and put it into a bucket, put it into a container, and it doesn't rattle at you or doesn't react to you. There is a lot of practice and technique that is going into how that snake is being picked up and moved. That doesn't translate there. It just looks easy. I always think that I've done my job right if the person that's paying for our service is mad that they're paying for it, because they're like, you're yelling from the other room, I could have done that. I bet you couldn't, because if you grab it and do it wrong, then the snake is fighting you, and there's a lot of other problems there. And that's also a great way to be bitten. So if you see a snake and it's moving around and you're worried about what it's going to do, get someone qualified to help, and just watch where it goes. Just stay back and watch it. If it's rattling at you, stay put. It's not going to chase after you. It's not going to come towards you aggressively. It's not going to do a lot of the stuff that you might think it's going to. Just stand back and watch where it goes. Usually people will be able to get there in time. The only reason that I wouldn't is if it's going to leave the property. So problem solved there too. So just stay back and watch it. It's actually something that happens quite a bit. The snake is on the move. They call us and we try to assess the situation. One of the first questions I always ask, if you've had me at your house to catch a rattlesnake before for you, you'll know that one of the first things I say is, what's it doing? Is it rattling? Is it sitting in a circle? Is it crawling? because that tells me everything I need to know about how long I have to get there or what you should do. So yeah, stay back and watch it. Okay, another one from email. Let's see. Sarah's asking, she says she's always curious about the relationship between the snake and its habitat. Does the snake adapt well to new territory after it's been relocated? So this is a complicated one. In general, not well. The reason for that, especially as the snake ages. So as a snake establishes a home range, and home range again, remember, is a collection of places that a snake has had success at or has found use in. Your house might be one of those if there are things there that are useful to a snake. That's a map of how to live for a snake. And life is hard for a rattlesnake. Prey opportunities are few. There's a lot of, rattlesnakes can starve to death. They can desiccate. They can be killed by predators pretty easily. So if you take away the things that are critical for it, all these known memorized sites, they and don't give them an opportunity to either find their way to the rest of their home range or give them a really good alternative, then they tend to spend a lot of time looking for that home range, and along the way they can be killed by predators. That's one of the top ways that they're killed, and that is because they spend a lot more time crawling around. They don't necessarily immediately starve to death or anything like that, but they do crawl around and that gets them killed. So if you're doing relocation and not sure of what that snake needs, then its chances of survival go down quite a bit. So one of the things that we use in our site selection information for where we should put a snake that we caught is not, if you're doing a search on papers about rattlesnake relocation, you're going to find some that say they all die. You're going to find some that say none of them die if you use the right habitat. So that's a clue, is that paying very close attention to the types of habitat that they're being put into can make a huge difference between whether or not they succeed or not. And in one of those studies, the snakes, some of them actually gained weight because they were put into a situation that maybe was advantageous to them. So research that goes into the stress response of rattlesnakes has a lot of information about what happens if you take a snake and move it to a new area and whether or not it can adapt that within its home range. And it looks like they can. So what we do when I catch a snake and I see a snake, okay, this snake I caught it in July, it's hot outside, it's using your shed to estivate, which means basically hibernate, but in the heat. These are the situations that this snake needs to live. It's this species of snake. It's doing this basically in this area. I look at a map. I find the nearest drainage. I find the closest place to that area that the snake is not going to become a problem for that homeowner or a neighbor. Take it up in that area, and then I find a situation, a microhabitat that's called. Which is, habitat is the desert. Microhabitat is this bush, this pile of rocks, this little climate that's existing under a tree. I put him into a situation that's emulating what they were found in, and what happens in that case, based on the research that I have read that is influencing this, is that those snakes, if it's done properly, will incorporate those situations as a successful point within their home range and return to it. And we've done, these are anecdotes, so this is something that I have not published, but these are things that I've seen, is that if you take a rattlesnake and put it into a pack rat nest and put a camera trap on it, which I've done, to see what happens, how long it takes for it to come out, versus if you just put it on the ground or stuff it in a hole or something. The way that you put it in the hole and escape in the hole, they will leave and then later even come back. And that's really important to me. If I put a rattlesnake in a pack rat nest and then it leaves, and then a day or two later I see that it's returned to that point of capture, that means that snake, it's useful to it. It's part of its, whether it's within its home range or not, that is now at least something that's safe, which is a much different situation than if the snake is just released out under the nearest bush or onto the grass when it's too hot and the snake crawls around and gets eaten. So that was a short question, and that's a very long answer. This is something, you know, that we can talk about infinitely in depth. But yeah, the relationship between a snake and its habitat is one that is memorized, and they do have a defined territory that they try to stick to. A key part of that for homeowners is if your yard is part of that home range and that is part of their habitat, if you modify that habitat so that it's no longer useful to the snakes, it's not something or accessible to the snakes, then it doesn't matter to them anymore. The goal is not to get rattlesnakes out of your area, is to get them off of your patio. If they're 20 feet away on the other side of the fence and your dog can't get out there and they're not coming into your yard, then they don't affect you in any way. And that's really what we're trying to do. So it's something, yeah, whether or not or how rattlesnakes interact with their environment is something we pay a lot of attention to. So I'll take another one from the Q&A. Let's see. Gary's asking a question about the monsoon season, if the rain gets them out in the open. So there's a couple of things that make rattlesnakes move when the monsoon starts. One of those is the moisture. There's a lot of stuff going on. They can go get a drink. They can move around safely. They're not pinned in these little estivation burrows, even though it's still very hot. What they can do, what also happens is the temperature stabilizes. So you have this, look at the temperature this June. You'll have these big spikes in temperature where it's super hot in the day and it gets cooler at night, and it happens very quick. Like this morning I started hiking at sunup, it was, you know, 65 degrees, and then 2 hours later it was high 80s. So that's useless to a rattlesnake. What are they going to do in an hour? They're going to get to where the rock that they're under is not something they want, and the surface of the same rock is lethally hot. So the humidity and cloud cover and water has a stabilizing effect on the temperature, which gets rattlesnakes moving. There's quite a bit to that. So yeah, if you're looking for rattlesnakes or want to see any, or if you're hoping not to see any and you're wondering when they're moving the most, that's going to be during that monsoon. So Bill is asking, if you're bit, should you apply a tourniquet in that area to slow the venom as you wait for 911 to show up? You should never do that. This can be confusing because if you look it up, you will find some doctors that say that you should do that. Those doctors are from Australia, okay? And that's one of the big things that you see is that the difference in toxin types, okay? So again, I'll say this anytime I say something that could be perceived as medical advice, because I'm trying not to give any, but if you're bitten by something that is rapidly destroying tissue and traveling through your lymphatic system, rupturing blood cells and turning your blood into a toxic soup, you do not want to impede that or trap that venom in any area. You can turn a situation that your body might be able to fight off decently until you can get help into one that you could potentially lose the limb or cause a much serious situation. Why that is different in areas that have purely neurotoxic animals, or like if you're in Africa and you're bitten by a black mamba, why that might be different is because slowing the spread of the venom does not cause necessarily any damage to the area. You're trying to stop it from reaching your heart and reaching vital organs. So it's a different situation, but yeah, you don't want to do it. There are some instances where somebody that's properly trained to do it could apply a pressure bandage to slow the venom. But there was also a study that came out that showed that people that are attempting to apply a pressure bandage, even people that are trained to do it with rattlesnake bites or copperhead bites, it was across the United States, it's done slightly wrong so often that the net gain of it is worse than if you were to just never do it. So short answer is just don't do it. Call 911, let them handle it. Definitely don't do a tourniquet. That's one of those old cowboy things that doesn't work. Okay, do rattlesnakes have an established den that they stay in for a while, or are they generally mobile? It depends on the species and the location, and the size of the den. It has a lot to do with the species of snake and the climate where it's at. So I'll use Western Diamondbacks as an example of some of this. Down here in the low valley, Western Diamondbacks choose one of several dens They have low site fidelity, meaning that they will pick one of several different dens. They don't always go back to the same one, and they'll maybe do it by themselves or in little small groups. The reason for that is because it doesn't get that cold here. If the goal is um, to not freeze to death, that's not hard to do in Phoenix. Just maybe you got to hide a little bit under the ground, right? Same species of rattlesnake, Western Diamondback rattlesnake, in the northern end of their range, up in Yavapai County, where I look for rattlesnake dens up there, where it does get cold and there is harder to avoid being frozen. They congregate in large dens there, and they use the same den every year, just because the challenge is different. The further north you go, if you start looking into even up into Canada, the den sizes get much larger. It's not because the snakes they like each other anymore. It's because the suitable areas that can actually result in survival during the winter are fewer. Fewer areas meet those criteria, so all the rattlesnakes need to use that site. So there's a lot of stuff there. So yeah, they tend to have an established den, and in Arizona, estivation works the same way, and you don't see that in a lot of states too, where it's very hot here. So where a speckled rattlesnake might den anywhere on the side of a mountain, just almost randomly, whichever rock that they tend to be under at the time. During the summer, they'll use the same hole to estivate in every time, like clockwork. You know exactly when they go there and exactly when they leave, and they show up in the same groups. So they, once again, it's similar to the question about habitat, is that they memorize good places to go, and dens are one of those places. So Richard is asking in an email, our home is right next to a desert mountain. We have both king snakes and bull snakes in our backyard. What's the best way to identify a bull snake or a rattlesnake without getting close? So yeah, bull snakes, gopher snakes, same species in Arizona. We call them gopher snakes. Is the one of the really common large snakes that are here, and very often in yards. So one of the best ways to tell, and this can be tricky because gopher snakes, they will coil up and raise their head and hiss and rattle their tails and try to look as menacing as they can. They'll flatten their heads and do a lot of things that are interesting. So how to tell a difference. First, a note on that, because this will come up and some of you will probably be thinking about it. Gopher snakes are not actually mimicking rattlesnakes when they're doing that. They're not trying to look like a rattlesnake. What's actually happening is that most or a lot of snakes tend to rattle their tails. Snakes that are nowhere on the same continent as rattlesnakes also rattle their tails to try to scare things away. So they both have that behavior. Rattlesnakes just got really good at it. They just really are better at rattling their tails. So that's a gopher snake's trying to look scary. There's really not compelling evidence to say that it is actually trying to look like a rattlesnake. Anyway, ways you can tell the difference. One of those is that a rattlesnake has a rattle that it will hold up when it's rattling, if it can, unless it's crawling. Hold its tail up, and rattles are more visible than you think. Okay, if a snake has a pointed tail, it's not a rattlesnake. Gopher snakes have a very clearly pointed tail with lots of bands on them, so they can look like a rattlesnake or a rattle if you haven't seen a rattle. But if you're wondering, just look up pictures of what a rattle looks like versus a pointed tail. If a rattle is missing, if the rattle is broken off or the rattlesnake is even born without a rattle, it doesn't mean that that it comes to a point. A pointed tail is not the default state of a tail minus a rattle. It would still be rounded off or something. Another way is that gopher snakes, they open their mouth when they're hissing. They kind of arch it a little bit, or they'll even open it all the way and try to look menacing that way too, as part of their hissing. Where rattlesnakes don't do that. They don't open their mouths. There are a small variety of rattlesnakes that do gape, but they live in Mexico. It's not something you're going to see here. Really, gopher snakes, depends on where you're at too. Around here in Phoenix, they tend to be a little bit more colorful. They're a yellow, straw colored, even kind of greenish they're described as, where most diamondbacks are more of a gray or brown. On diamondbacks, also look at the tail. The banding before the rattle is very distinct. It's just the normal color of the snake, and then all of a sudden it's this stark black and white banding. which diamondbacks do, but gopher snakes don't. And as I was saying before, with telling the difference between a Mojave rattlesnake and a western diamondback, it would be a good idea to join one of those snake identification groups. Ours is facebook.com/groups/AZ snake ID, and just get used to looking at different pictures of them so you can tell the difference between them. I'll do the last one from the email, and then I'll just start doing Q&A until everyone's sick of it. Kathy says, we back up on a busy street with a mountain on the other side. We have a block wall. Should that deter snakes from entering our yard? We also have a small dog, and what can we do to keep her safe? So the dog that we've already talked about, rattlesnakeready.com to get aversion training. And so yeah, a block wall itself usually will not repel rattlesnakes, and that is because there's lots of weep holes. There's holes in it that we can get around. So, you know, if you're only an inch tall, the gate or wall might as well be wide open if there's a hole in it. It actually even has a funneling effect. So if you have a 100-foot block wall and there's one little gap in there that a rattlesnake can get through, you're effectively going to catch all the rattlesnakes in the area. So it only doesn't not work, but can keep them in your yard. Also, gates. This is something that we see a lot doing rattlesnake fencing, and something that you know, it's actually even turned into some arguments with people occasionally, because we have a very strict policy that we do the whole yard, including gates, or we don't do it. And the reason for that is because rattlesnakes very often come in through the front too, and then they get stuck. So if you are building a wall or any kind of enclosure or snake fencing or anything like that, and you can't secure it 100%, if you do anything to it, you are just building a better and better snake trap. If you can't secure an area entirely, it's best to do nothing, so that snakes that enter can also leave freely. And we see that result quite a bit, where we get called out, handyman came out, installed a snake fence along the back wall, or there's a block wall that has some screens on it, and there's a snake crawling back and forth on it desperately as the heat of the day picks up. That's a snake that came in through the front, got stuck when it was trying to leave, and then is either going to die there or going to go try to find a spot to hide on your patio. So yeah, the block wall would work great as long as you do it 100%. There's no gaps at all. Rattlesnakes cannot climb straight up block walls. They can't do it. They're not built to do it. It's the same as anybody in here. I can't just lay against a block wall and belly shimmy up it. They are not made to do it. There's nothing in their physiology that will allow them to do that. I have seen on Facebook where you get someone that says that they claim to have seen it happen. I do not believe. I don't believe it. I hear enough either misinterpretations or dreams. I don't know. It's just crazy things that people say that rattlesnakes do to have significant doubt that was something that they saw. Other snakes are better climbers. I have actually I'm going to grab one right now to show you what happened last night. I was called out to a property to pick up a snake that was in an area that was snake fenced. There was a bird nest in the area that another king snake was found recently too. So this is a California king snake, and this was caught in Paradise Valley. Really sweet little guys. So this snake can climb exceptionally well. It can get in, it can climb up stucco. It can get into the corners between a block and a wall, and it can work its way up there. They're very good at climbing because that's what they are made to do. That's why their body works. Rattlesnakes are not. Rattlesnakes are made to sit and wait and ambush. They can climb trees, they can do stuff like that, but they're not great climbers. They're not going to go up a concrete wall. So yes, concrete wall, if done properly and securely and 100% done, can keep a rattlesnake out of an area. Okay, I'm going to go to another question here. So now it's just Q&A, so I'll just start knocking these off. How often will you run into rattlesnakes on trails? It depends on the trail and let's say that there's an area, let's say South Mountain, where a lot of people hike all the time, and there's lots and lots of rattlesnakes there. You know, if you go on a hike there in the morning at sunup, let's say you went hiking between sunup and 10 in the morning, and you did that every day for a week in the spring, you'll run into a rattlesnake at some point, or you'll see one. You know, if you're looking for them intentionally, you might see more than that. Um, but it's something that happens pretty often. And really, it's an interesting thing I see on Facebook in the Arizona hiking group. I see it a lot where people say, I've hiked here for 20 years and I've only seen one rattlesnake, um, as a comment on how few rattlesnakes there are. Um, those are people that just haven't seen any rattlesnakes. That's all it is. Um, and it's interesting how the experiences of people affect their perception of how many rattlesnakes there are without the really obvious answer of what's their own behavior and how are they changing. So one of those is the idea that rattlesnakes are rattling less because of lots of things. And this is an idea that's popped up all over the place, and there's no basis to it. And one of the things that people say, and I believe them on this, is that, well, I've seen it myself because I've been hiking here for 30 years. And as I hike, I see more and more rattlesnakes that don't rattle anymore. What's happening is that person is probably just getting better at seeing rattlesnakes. So they're, you know, when you are hiking when you're younger, you probably get rattled at by every rattlesnake you see. And by the time you're hiking and you're in your 40s or 50s and you start seeing a lot of coiled rattlesnakes, you just experienced, you pick those out a little bit more. So that's all that is. Doug is asking how many rattlesnakes are in Arizona, how many species? Nothing. This is a question that is impossible to answer without somebody getting mad at you or saying that you're wrong, because there's no great way to answer it. So according to SSAR and the Arizona Game and Fish Department, which are relying on the state of things prior to a paper that was published in 2003, there are 13 species of rattlesnake, which lump the western rattlesnake group into one that has several subspecies. The Rattlesnakes of Arizona book that came out a couple of years ago is in line with how a lot of the acceptance of that those papers say that there's 15 rattlesnakes, that elevates those to full species status, and then another one just came out that drops one of those into a subspecies of another, and then there's it on and on and on. So somewhere between 13 and 15 species is kind of the answer. So I don't claim to have any experience that could, you know, I have different groups of cards that I have to have with me to put on displays depending on who I'm displaying alongside, so I'm not giving bad information. You know, on our website we have 15 species, but I'm going to probably roll that back at some point here. I actually have in some areas. And Doug's also asking if I've ever been bitten by a rattlesnake, and if not, if I have any other interesting stories to share. I've not been bitten by a rattlesnake. I'm fortunate in that way. I take every precaution that I possibly can to not be bitten by rattlesnakes. So, you know, it's not that that won't happen, or that it's not likely that it'll happen at some point. I'm just going to do my best to do it. Lots of interesting stories. I've been close to being bitten many times, to where, and I qualify being almost bitten as I didn't have complete control of the situation, where the snake, where I was totally in range of the snake and it could have bitten me. It just didn't. Right? That's something that happens occasionally, and some of that's pretty scary. But no, I haven't been bitten. I'm going to really try to keep it that way. I have all 10 fingers. I'm going to try to retire that way. So one thing I'm going to do before, because I didn't know if this would come up into one of the questions, but I have a couple of rattlesnakes. I'm in my office, but I brought a couple just to show. Let's see how well this works. Didn't bring lots, but this is a southwestern speckled rattlesnake. This is one of my favorite snakes. I have lots of favorite snakes. Let's see how to do this best. That works. So this guy was given to me by a friend 11 years ago as an adult. So that means that this snake is probably either approaching or in its 20s. It's an old snake, very healthy, still eats well. Really great snake to have. I don't really take him out very often just because I know he's an older guy and I don't want him to get hurt, or, you know, not that they get hurt when they do that. I just don't. He's retired, we'll say. This snake is a very common species that you find in Phoenix, except here they look different. Camelback Mountain or the Phoenix Mountain Preserve, they're kind of a reddish color or a rusty color. On South Mountain, they're more of a white and blue color. This one comes from a particular mountain range where you can probably guess what color the rocks are. It's just this really white granite. So the snakes in this situation are white. It's really amazing to see them in context where this snake is sitting there where it's supposed to be, where its camouflage does its work. This snake is nearly invisible. Just a really cool. I'm gonna see if my camera can even focus on it. I can a little bit. Really nice, well-developed rattle on it too. So rattles often break off in the wild. So in the wild, it's very uncommon to see a rattle that is this long as this guy. And it's just because this guy lives a pampered life of luxury where he gets fed and just gets to sleep and he doesn't have to get wet and in the sun, and this rattle doesn't break off. I have one other one. That's a very special snake. This guy is called an Arizona ridge-nosed rattlesnake. This is one of our protected species of rattlesnake that we have here. We have several of them. We have, I think, 4 of them. And I have this guy under permit from Game and Fish. And the reason that I have him, and I have her also, is that this does not show up in education displays very often in Arizona at all. There are a number of groups that have them, but it's just an individual, or there's the Arizona Herpetological Association is doing something very similar to what we're doing. It's basically the same thing as we have a pair of them that we were able to collect legally from the wild as babies, so that we can raise them up and breed them, and then have animals that we can show or give to organizations like the zoo or other educational groups that could benefit from having one of these. So even in Arizona, our own Phoenix Zoo, which is a great zoo and has a good reptile display, does not have an Arizona ridge-nosed rattlesnake. They have one of the ridge-nosed rattlesnake subspecies, but it's not the one that we find here. Meanwhile, you can go to other states and find these guys in other zoos and other collections that were, from one way or another, probably not sourced legally. So it's a tricky situation, but next year he is gonna mate. We're gonna try to sort that out. He's a really, really cool snake. And anyway, those are the ones that I brought with me. So Dawn is asking if I can recommend any books about rattlesnakes to help with IDs, habitat, etc. 2 of them. One of them's out. The first one that I'd recommend right off the bat is it's a double book series called The Rattlesnakes of Arizona. Came out in 2017, I think. Exceptional book. Lots and lots of detail, great maps, lots of photos. Yeah, it's a really good one. I'd recommend that one. You can find it on Amazon. And then there's another one that is going to be coming out hopefully shortly. We'll see. Written by some people that really know what they're doing. I think it's just called Snakes of Arizona, and it's going to be, I hear, the largest and most detailed book of this kind that there is. Just there's going to be a lot of detail in that, so I can't wait till that one comes out. But yeah, those 2 books. So right away you can go buy that double. It's a little spendy because it is a really nice hardcover book, but I would recommend it. It's just a very good book to have in the collection. So Dan is asking, where's the craziest place I have found a rattlesnake? So if you're talking about on a relocation call or something, I assume that's it. Then that would probably be one of the snakes that we've caught in a toilet. Andrew, yes, you are on mute. Everyone's on mute. Anyway, yeah, some weird places like that. I've gotten a rattlesnake out of a kid's bedroom before. Not sure how it got in there. We had one situation where it was in central Phoenix where somebody apparently they got evicted from their house, so they apparently had a whole bunch of Western Diamondbacks. So before they left, they just knocked the tank over, and a bunch of Diamondbacks were in the house waiting for. They also trashed the place, so I had to go search through a really gross house to find random Diamondbacks that were in there. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy places that we found unexpected ones. I guess downtown Phoenix a number of times. I think the only I was always really confused by that until I found one of them that seemed to be the culprit. Is that there's a depot for the street sweepers that clean the city, the whole valley that's there, and we got a rattlesnake there. So I think what happens is the street sweepers, like, they're picking up rattlesnakes when they go up north or south, and then they come back and the snake crawls out of the sweeper. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, there's this could go on for a long. There's a lot of like unexpected places you find rattlesnakes. I think, we've gotten off of patios. Some of it's interesting is the behavior of people too. We had one a few years ago that was notable. Was at a very popular restaurant in Scottsdale on a Saturday night, and someone called and said there's a rattlesnake on the patio by the front door. You need to come get it. So I go up there, and they weren't watching it or anything. They just called and said there was a rattlesnake there, and people were coming right past it, like as if nothing was happening the whole time. So it's weird stuff. Anyway, so JM's asking, does rattlesnake training for dogs involve shock collars? It does, and it should. So when used properly, a shock collar in a dog, it's not made as a punishment. It's made just to, a dog has no idea what a rattlesnake is. It's just like sticking their nose on a cactus or something. They're not going to hopefully do that more than once. It's not made to hurt them. It's not made to do anything. It's just to provide context. I would, anything in depth about rattlesnake training, I would refer to Cody at Rattlesnake Ready. But I'll say that in our research, we have seen that the alternatives to shock collars, which is a positive reinforcement version where you teach the dog in a positive way to stay away from rattlesnakes, works great to have dogs avoid rattlesnakes in your presence, and does nothing to do that. When dog bites actually occur is when you're not there. When you let the dog out in the morning to go to the bathroom, or the last thing you do before you go to bed, that is the number one time that dogs are being bitten. So if your dog is only doing that because it's looking for a reaction from you, there's no way that that's going to work. The way that method of aversion training using collars, how that's been perfected, is it's a good thing to do, and it's going to hurt a lot less than hemotoxin tearing through your dog's body. So I would do it. Don is asking, with the hot temperatures and people heading to the mountains, what are some species that can be encountered up there? So it depends on which mountains, but I'm assuming up along the rim where people flock to. Sedona, Payson, Prescott, all those areas. People are going to run into Arizona black rattlesnakes. That's that dark rattlesnake up there. Locals might call them timber rattlesnakes. They are not. Timber rattlesnakes are a completely different species that live on a completely different part of the country, but yeah, the locals will call them that. Also, people are going to see black-tailed rattlesnakes. They are green or yellow. Lots of people are going to identify those as Mojave rattlesnakes because they get stuck on that green coloration. It's a common one in the superstitions, where I talk to some guy, I've been hiking superstitions for 50 years, or you can't tell me there's not Mojave rattlesnakes up there. They're all over the place. And then he sends me a picture, and then seems upset to learn that he's never seen a Mojave rattlesnake probably, but he's seen a lifetime's worth of black-tailed rattlesnakes. That's mostly what you're going to see. There are those types of snakes. That's most of the ones you're going up to on the rim. There's some places you can find diamondbacks, or if you leave the rim and go further north, you can run into prairie rattlesnakes and some interesting things. But that's usually what you're going to see. Okay, so Beth is asking in the chat. I'm going to try to just answer that one, just because I'm looking at how common coral snakes are in Scottsdale, the McDowell Mountains area, and said he had a neighbor that there was a coral snake in his garden, is ready to do anything about to kill it. I educated him, but it's likely to be a long-nosed snake. So coral snakes are very common in many of in that region in particular, especially along the northern corridor of Phoenix. Not so much in Phoenix. I actually haven't documented any there. But you're right. Most coral snake encounters are long-nosed snakes. And the reason for that is this pesky rhyme, right, that people use, where they, I'm working on a video about this right now, but I asked a bunch of people, like, what is the rhyme that you remember? And as expected, I got a ton of different answers. People all remember the rhyme differently. It's like red and yellow, kill a fellow, red on black, something with Jack, right? Nobody answered the same way twice. A portion of the people got it backwards. meaning that if you're relying on that rhyme to identify something that could be a coral snake in your yard, you would confirm that the coral snake is not a coral snake, and then, you know, maybe play with it or something. The problem is that there's a logical order that happens when you're trying to identify something that does not start with, I don't know what this is, I'm going to use evidence to try to identify it. It starts with, I think I know what this is, I'm going to use evidence to try to disprove that. So if there's any ambiguity in the middle of that, in the evidence, then you're left with the default position, which is coral snake, right? So if you get a snake and you're trying to see if red touches yellow, a long-nosed snake does the trick. A lot of times there's it's cream colored, there's a lot of red on it very often, there's black, and it looks enough like it to satisfy the requirements of the rhyme. So people hack it up, and I get tons and tons and tons of pictures of people who have killed long-nosed snakes thinking they're coral snakes. Also, our coral snakes here in Arizona, the yellow color is not often something you would describe as yellow. It's very often white or cream colored or even kind of pinkish sometimes. So just the other day, there was somebody on our identification group that used the rhyme to identify against a coral snake and was holding a snake, saying, well, there was no yellow on it, so this is not a coral snake, you know. And it's not really her fault, right? Because these are things that we are taught. That rhyme is something that you learned from somebody that you trust, some, you know, maybe even the Discovery Channel or something like that, to tell you whether it's coral snake or not knowing that it just doesn't work here in Arizona. She was holding a coral snake in these pictures. So you know, the rhyme that I would use in Arizona, or really anywhere, if you wanted to know, it's not as catchy if a snake is a coral snake or not. It's just, don't touch snakes. It's a good one, and it'll always do you well if you don't know what it is. But yeah, coral snakes are very common, not commonly seen at all. They're not dangerous. They are venomous, but they're not dangerous. The difference between that is if you have a jug of bleach in your house, if you had a tendency to drink it whenever you encountered it, bleach is the most dangerous thing you could possibly find in your house. But that's not what you do. So if you see a snake and you have a tendency to grab them every time you see them, then yes, a coral snake does pose danger. But there's never been a single accidental bite, to my knowledge, that has ever been recorded from a coral snake. And I don't count bites to the webbing of the fingers or hands as accidental, because you're holding it. So yeah, you can see one, but most of the time they're long-nosed snakes. Hey, Beth is asking about the dog vaccine, and yeah, she says that after a couple of rounds, her vet recommended against it. And as I explained earlier, that's the experience that I would have with my dog, is I would not give my dog the vaccine. So Rob is asking, if you are bitten, is it important or helpful to the hospital to try and identify the species, Western Diamondback or Mojave Green, etc.? Also, you know, again with the disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, but no, it is not important. And personally, if I had a doctor that was wanting to know the species and was planning on meaningfully altering their treatment based on their assumptions about that species, I would demand another doctor. The reason for that is most people are not that great at identifying rattlesnakes. The differences between Mojave and a Diamondback, you know, it's something that you see people, you know, even the other day, people that are incredibly experienced at seeing snakes regionally, seeing the same species in one region from another, can lead them wrong. And there's, you know, people that I very much respect got one wrong. You know, it's something that happens. So I don't have any faith that most doctors are going to be able to tell the difference with enough reliability to alter their course of action with the snake. You know, there are a handful of exceptions that I would, you know, but it literally a handful in the country that I would personally say. This is just for my treatment. Okay, so I'm just, there's a little bug in here. Sorry. Anyway, also the venom types of rattlesnakes is not absolute. If you were to look at the makeup of the assumption being that a Diamondback is going to have this type of venom and a Mojave is going to have neurotoxic venom, that changes very drastically depending on the region. Mojave rattlesnake found in Cave Creek, Arizona, is likely going to have a very different toxin makeup in its venom than one that is found 60 miles to the west or 100 miles to the south. Or it could have any number of those things or any combination of those things. It could have all neurotoxins, multiple types of neurotoxins, or almost no neurotoxin. It'd be a hemotoxic snake. So you would need to have a doctor that could reliably tell the difference between those two things, and also a doctor that is up to date enough on the venom composition distribution of those species and the location of that snake, and some luck to meaningfully affect treatment. There is one case that I am aware of to where someone didn't do very well after being bitten by a rattlesnake because a doctor started treating as if it was just going to be neurotoxic symptoms because he thought it was a Mojave rattlesnake, and it wasn't. He started having a lot of other problems from it. Anecdote, I can't remember exactly where I read that. I could find it, and if you were to search for it, I'm sure you could find that too. But it doesn't really matter. Part of that is also because the antivenom that's here, the one that's widely used right now, is called Crofab. It's something called a polyvalent antivenom, meaning that it is made from the venom types from multiple snakes. So the antivenom for a diamondback or a Mojave green, it's the same antivenom that they would use. What I have heard, and this is what I have read in our protocols and what I have seen people discuss, doctors that are venom specialists discuss, is that the right kind of treatment is to liberally give antivenom. If there's other stuff happening, then give more antivenom and treat symptoms as they occur, because no two bites are going to be different. There's no two bites from a Mojave green that are going to be the same in any patient. So yeah, don't try to catch it. You don't need to identify it. People actually, they catch the rattlesnake and kill it and bring it into the hospital. That can only cause harm. So yeah, no need to do it. Maybe for trivia, or you just kind of want to see what it is. Okay, so Ellen's asking, maybe you already went over this. I didn't read this. How to make snakes slither away when doing yard work, loud music, or banging pans. You really can't. I wish there was a way to do it. If you wanted to do it, then you could change the dynamics of the yard. So maybe get the sprinklers going or something like that. Change the temperature of the yard. Use a hose, wet it down, try to spray it down. That's probably the best way to do it. So I would try to do that. That might be a good way to do it. Michael's asking, I have 2 king snakes and a family of 5 roadrunners hanging around the old dairy. Oh yeah, hi Michael. I'll talk to you. Should you be concerned if you have 2 king snakes and a family of 5 roadrunners? No, not at all. So king snakes can't hurt anybody. An interesting B-side to that, when people ask, hey, I have a king snake in my yard, and I say it's harmless, and then the response is very often, well, I have dogs and kids. When I say something is harmless, I'm including dogs and kids. So if you ever hear me say it twice, that's why I do it. I'll say this snake can't hurt people. It also can't hurt kids, and also can't hurt dogs, because those are a chain of questions that I answer quite a bit. But king snakes, the one I was just holding is a king snake, no venom. If it does bite, it's going to feel like a little pinch, make a little cut on your hand or something. It's not a big deal at all. Also, king snakes eat rattlesnakes. So do roadrunners. So you could take it as a sign, if you have lots of roadrunners and king snakes around, that you might have some prey that they're looking for. But those animals of themselves are nothing to be worried about. Beth is asking if there's any chance to join for a ride-along and a snake removal. It's very difficult to do that. And the reason for that is, so we try to do that with the news. We try to do that a lot of times. The reason why it's hard is because it's an emergency situation. We treat it as emergency response. So where, if a snake gets called in Cave Creek, I am running out the door and driving up there, under questionable speed limits to get up there to have the best outcome for that situation. It is very difficult to spend any time trying to coordinate anything to be able to do it. So maybe sometime we're trying to figure out some way to do it. Even when we're training people, we have a hard time doing it because we don't even know when calls are coming in. So somebody would have to just hang out on my couch until a call comes in while I'm in here doing office work until a call comes in. So it would be neat, but it's not something we can really do. Okay, an anonymous attendee is asking, how long does a small dog have to get to a vet in order to be saved? I closed my cup. There's error number two. I'm having more problems with my cup than Zoom today. So small dogs fare worse than big dogs. Less mass, the venom can affect them faster. They don't do as well typically. So, depending if it's a bad bite on the face of a small dog, it could pass away very quickly. The best thing to do in those cases is just to make sure you have a very good plan with your vet ahead of time, and 24-hour vet that treats rattles. Go over that with them, and do everything you can with the dog. It's all prevention stuff in that case. If you have a small dog, also, if you have a small dog who lives in areas that rattlesnakes do, your bigger threats are probably going to be coyotes and birds of prey too. So yeah, rattlesnakes can bite those, but there's a lot of things that can. So really I've seen there's I wish I could remember his name, because I tell you right now, but there's a guy in Cave Creek that seems to do a very good job of, if you were to look at coyote-proof dog runs, I think you'd find them. That's probably the answer. And we can snake-proof coyote-proof dog runs too, so those are good things. Question is, if there's one, can you expect to see more, and do they travel together? Depending on the time of year, there is a likelihood that there could be more. So that's one of the reasons, that's why it's good to have somebody that knows a lot about snakes to come out to your property if you're doing a relocation, as opposed to a volunteer or the fire department, because in the springtime, if there is a female snake there, and she's an adult, there's a good chance there's a male around there too, or that a male will show up and look for her. So that's something we talk with the homeowners about, is if I go out there and, okay, it's a female, be a little more cautious over the next few days. Very often, a male does show up, or we find another snake on the property and it is male, or more than one male. They're attracted to this female. If we find a juvenile or a subadult male crawling around, nobody cares. He's there by himself. No one's looking for him. So depending on the time of year, it can be, they can have a reason to be together, social reasons. Most of the time not. Really the thing to look for is if the snake is there, and the snake is there for a reason, that it's being attracted to the property, then yes, you can expect more rattlesnakes to also probably know about that opportunity, but they don't have anything to do with each other. That's how that usually works. They don't travel together. They don't travel in pairs. I think that there's some confirmation bias there, where someone heard that rattlesnakes travel in pairs, then they saw a rattlesnake with another rattlesnake, and that must be true, and that is how folklore and mythology is born. So if you see one, there's some lessons there, but generally it doesn't mean that there's more. Another anonymous one asking about the gestalt when determining Western Diamondback or Mojave. The overall appearance basically is trying to determine between those species, is looking at the whole animal. What makes the determination for me? And you look at the face stripes and tail stripes. So there's a number of features. The tail banding, like I mentioned, the Diamondback usually has thicker white bands than the Mojave. The head scales, Mojave typically has 2 or sometimes 3, and Diamondbacks have more. What I'm looking at mostly is when I'm trying to tell a difference, just the pattern of it. Western Diamondback tends to have a noisier pattern. There's more speckling in the scales. There's more black flecks. There's more variation and errors in the colors and distribution of the diamonds going down the back. The diamonds tend to also be very, they'll change shape between the neck and going down towards the tail. Where a Mojave rattlesnake in general has a much more clean appearance. There are fewer errors. There's less speckling. The scales tend to be one color per scale. There's just a different appearance to it. But there's lots of other stuff. The body, after looking at so many of them, just the general body build and the shape of the head and angles involved look very different to me. So best way to do it, just find a resource where you can look at lots of pictures of both of them, and check your work. Get a snake, take a picture of it, throw it up there, see what you think it is, and see what people say. And that's a good way to kind of learn. Okay, another one about whether or not you need to know the snake was bitten. Lisa is asking about if snakes live in a small radius. This is kind of the same answer as the home range question I answered earlier. So if you see a snake in your yard, it may or may not live there, but there is a good chance it will come back if it finds something that's useful. So the best thing to do is change the situation in your yard. Gary is saying he's heard the most dangerous rattlesnake is the tiger rattlesnake. Is that true, and why? So no, it's not. So dangerous and venomous. Dangerous and most venomous are two very different things. Okay, tiger rattlesnakes have probably the most toxic venom of rattlesnakes, drop for drop. The Mojave rattlesnake also does. They both appear at the top of that list, depending on what you're looking at, right? But the most dangerous rattlesnake is the one that can inject the most venom into you, and also the ones that are most likely to bite you. So tiger rattlesnakes are exceptionally toxic, but there are very, very few bite records from them. And most bite records that occur from them are people that actually keep tiger rattlesnakes as pets or otherwise. So no, tiger rattlesnakes, very toxic venom, but not dangerous. It's kind of like the coral snake. They have a very toxic neurotoxin, but you need to do something most of the time to get that venom into you. You have to be a participant in that. Western diamondback rattlesnake is the most dangerous rattlesnake that we have here. It's big, has a lot of venom, it's powerful venom, and they can be anywhere. So tiger rattlesnakes have potential venom, but are not themselves all that dangerous. Okay, looking for more questions. We are kind of leaking viewers, I understand. It's been about an hour and a half, but I'll just stick around until we get through a few of these, or until my wife comes home with the baby. So the audio quality will change dramatically when that happens. Any advice for encountering a rattlesnake while camping, or non-aggressive snakes in the area where you're setting up camp? People, I see this a lot, and it's hard to know what to do even if you really like snakes and don't want to kill it. I see people that, I'm setting up camp and there was a rattlesnake that showed up and they feel they needed to kill it because, they didn't want it to show up later. And I wouldn't do that, but I understand why somebody would do that. The best thing you can do is just, most of the time, if a snake is crawling through an area, it will continue crawling if you allow it to. If a snake is crawling into camp, it's not crawling into camp. It's crawling through your camp. So just back off and let it do its thing. If it's rattling at you already, get out of sight and let it do its thing. It's going to leave. If the rattlesnake does set up in your camp, or if it's already there, disturb it. You can always change camps too. I know that's kind of a pain in the butt, but you don't. I'm not going to recommend that anybody go and engage a rattlesnake and go try to do something like that. But I guess I will say that if it was my camp and I didn't have great experience in handling rattlesnakes, I'll try to remember those days. I would just do something to make it feel like camp is not where it wants to be. Water is an easy one there. I would get a super soaker or a hose or something. It's hard when you're camping. You don't really have those, but try to do something to get it to leave. It doesn't want to be there. Most of the time when people are describing experiences with rattlesnakes, it's a rattlesnake crawling they perceive into camp. And really it's trying to crawl to the rock pile that is, several hundred meters away from camp. So what are the 3 most venomous rattlesnakes in Arizona? So tiger rattlesnake and a Mojave rattlesnake. I would say that the next one, somebody will probably see this and tell me I'm wrong, and I may be, would be the midget faded rattlesnake. It has a neurotoxin called a concolor toxin, which is shown to be incredibly toxic. They're a subspecies of the western rattlesnake. They live just up in the very top of Arizona, an area that's actually very difficult to find them. So those are probably the top ones. And the most dangerous rattlesnake, as I said, is a western diamondback. They cause the most bites and the most deaths. Rebecca is asking, what is the normal lifespan of a rattlesnake? So in captivity, they can live a lot longer. We have one rattlesnake that is easily in its 30s. The white one that I showed you earlier, he's probably in his 20s. In the wild, it's a different situation because you tend to get eaten by things. If you're a wild animal or a human prior to, recent history, you do not die a quiet death. All animals die in terrible agony. they all get eaten by something or killed. They starve to death or something bad happens to them. So if you're a rattlesnake and you're on the menu for many, many things, and you have a 10% chance of surviving the year, which I would say is high, that means that you would live to 10 years before the math runs out of that. And then after that, you're a very lucky snake living beyond the odds. So I would say most rattlesnakes in the wild don't live more than 10 or 15 years. There are definitely rattlesnakes that are much older than that, though, that have figured out how to do that. As a rattlesnake gets older, I would say its experience in how to avoiding those situations keeps it alive longer. So first few years of life, you're toast most of the time. We see a very few young of year, we call it, where a snake was born last year and then that's a year old. You see baby newborn rattlesnakes and you see adult rattlesnakes because that middle class gets eaten quite often. There is a rattlesnake that I'm aware of. I don't know if it's still alive, but it's being radio tracked. It's a timber rattlesnake in the east somewhere that is in its 50s and still doing well. So they can live a very long time. In captivity, they tend to die when the owner makes a mistake. The way that they're being kept isn't right, so they can die, or they just don't adapt to it very well, or something like the air conditioning goes out, or the owner dies and the snake's all transferred to somewhere and other problems. Tim is saying he's heard that bull snakes, aka gopher snakes, keep rattlesnakes away, and he's skeptical. Is it true? So gopher snakes and bull snakes do not eat rattlesnakes. That is a thing that people say very often. It's not true. It doesn't mean it hasn't happened once or twice, but if you look at the stomach content or stomach records or any dietary studies that have happened with gopher snakes, you do not see remains that could be identified as rattlesnakes. So there's no evidence that says that they do. I also find them sitting together often enough. You will find people that say that, well, I've seen it. I've seen gopher snakes eating rattlesnakes. This is what they tell me right before they show me a picture of a coach whip eating a rattlesnake. Because coach whips, even though they're common, they're also identified as gopher snakes quite often too. So they don't directly affect rattlesnakes being on a property, but they can, to some extent, help by just eating rodents. They're competition. Gopher snakes are tremendous predators. They eat anything. They eat very often. So just having a big gopher snake in the area is going to help knock out a lot of the rodents that are there, and they will be in competition for rattlesnakes. So there is an indirect effect that could help keep rattlesnakes away. They certainly are not going to increase the number of rattlesnakes that are in an area. But no, they don't have a direct correlation. They don't actually kill rattlesnakes. So, yes and no. It's complicated. Being asked if they come in through a dryer vent, I have seen that happen 2 times out of the 7,000 or so rattlesnakes that I've caught at homes over the years. So yes, but not something to worry about. How big is a rattlesnake's home range? It can be as small as the size of 1 or 2 acres, depending on the species and location. It can also be several miles. So the resources available to a snake, including prey and opportunities to estivate and hibernate, and how many other rattlesnakes are there, will dictate how large a rattlesnake's range is. The more rattlesnake has to travel to find great features, the more it will travel. The larger its range apparently is. There are instances where Western Diamondback will travel longer in a single day to get to an area to hunt than some rattlesnakes, like a prairie rattlesnake, in an area where there's pretty much ubiquitous habitat, will travel in its entire life. So it's variable, but it's on the upper end. It is several miles. I know of one timber rattlesnake that was tracked by a friend of mine that it traveled 6 miles within a season. And there's other ones that they just kind of stay in the same little hillside their whole life. Linda's asking which predators are for rattlesnakes. What eats rattlesnakes? Everything eats rattlesnakes. That's why they're so jumpy. When you're a baby rattlesnake, tarantulas, invertebrates, all kinds of other snakes, road runners, everything eats them. Big rattlesnakes can be killed by coyotes and often are. Birds of prey eat rattlesnakes. Hawks and owls, bobcats eat rattlesnakes. So if you get around the pointy part, if you're in nature and you're an animal, and if you've adapted a way to get around being bitten by a rattlesnake, they're just slow moving protein. So things eat them. That's why they're so defensive, is that they're jumpy for good reason. So yeah, other snakes even eat rattlesnakes. In the case of sidewinders, occasionally another sidewinder will eat a rattlesnake. So lots of things eat them. Another question about how many rattlesnakes there are. And yeah, Sylvia, I hope I answered that well. Is that why some websites say 13 and some say 17 and some say 15? Is because it's undetermined. Somewhere between those, depending on your feelings about mitochondrial DNA and other things. Okay. Sarah's asking about the laws about owning rattlesnakes and whether or not it's legal to keep rattlesnakes. So in Arizona, there are no laws to prevent a person from keeping a rattlesnake. If you have a hunting license, it is legal to collect most rattlesnake species. And I have to, put an asterisk on there. All the protected species and Gila monsters, obviously, you can't keep. I have a permit, so I can keep different things. But I wish there were some sort of permitting system or something, because I have seen a lot of really bad things for how people keep rattlesnakes. It's something that people keep because it's a cool thing that can get attention. So there are a lot of rattlesnakes that are caught and kept in very, very poor conditions because of that, and then people just go dump them out in the desert. So it would be great. I'm not maybe as strict as Florida's laws, but it'd be great if there was something that at least registers that, like, you at least are keeping this thing for the right reasons or have had some experience with it. So yes, you can keep rattlesnakes here. If you want to have protected rattlesnakes or Gila monsters, you need to have a permit for it that you're not going to get because if someone's saying that they have a permit to keep a pet Gila monster or collect one, and they don't have an active education program or other scientific research going on that has a very established cause, then they're full of it. So yeah, you can keep them. It's not a great idea for most people, but you can. Okay, Richard is asking, if you hear a rattlesnake 4 or 5 feet off the hiking trail, what's the appropriate action to or just keep walking? Just walk away from it. If it's off trail and you're not within its striking distance, just keep going. That's it. If a rattlesnake is on the trail, go around it. A rattlesnake strike range is around 1/2 to 2/3 of its body length. I always give it up to its entire body length. Its body length is not as long as you probably are expecting. We have lots of people that give us descriptions of rattlesnakes they see that are 6 or 7 feet long. They weren't. They were shorter than that. Perception does some crazy stuff to how big a rattlesnake is. But if there's a rattlesnake and it's off trail and it's a large adult being around 4 feet long, unless you have to get within that 4 feet, then there's no danger for you to go cruising right past. Most of the time, the snake is rattling and it's also backing up and leaving, so you can go past safely. If the rattlesnake is sitting right in the middle of the trail, your options are to go back until it can't see you, wait a little while, because the snake wants to leave too. It's not guarding the trail. It feels like it doesn't have an opportunity to leave. So if you get out of sight for a little bit, then it'll take off. Or if it's not going, then just go around it. I don't think any park rangers would ever be upset about you going off trail for just a moment to avoid a rattlesnake on the trail. you also don't need to do anything about it. You know, I've seen where people have crushed a rattlesnake on a rock because they feel like if they didn't, it's going to get the next person. It's just not the case. There's lots of rattlesnakes out there. Sometimes you run into them. Okay, Renee is asking, what are the qualifications does someone have to be an employee at Rattlesnake Solutions? Honestly, I prefer to hire people for the relocation line that do not have a lot of experience with rattlesnakes. The reason for that is that it's infinitely easier to teach somebody that has never handled a rattlesnake before on how to do it than it is to train some guy that's been handling rattlesnakes for 20 years to stop doing all the bad habits that he has. We treat this as a profession, which means that we don't pick things up by the head. We don't do anything showboaty. Anything that we do with rattlesnakes should look as boring as possible. So if you have somebody that's kind of grown up catching rattlesnakes, it's almost insulting to them often to say, hey, you can't do that with this. I know you know about rattlesnakes, but you can't do that with us. So I don't have that problem with people that are just interested in nature. You know, like one of our best, or some of our best people that we have right now are people that they had an interest in nature, an interest in snakes, and contacted us, and they're great at it now, and I don't have to worry about them doing silly stuff. So yeah, a lot of it has to do with just availability and where you're at. Every year I look and say, okay, we need somebody in the West Valley. Who do we know who applied? So if you're interested in that, send us an email, tell me where you're at, and if we have a gap, then we'll look at it. And this is a good question. I'm surprised no one's asked this before from Renee. Is it true that baby rattlesnakes are more dangerous than adults? It is not true at all. It's just a myth that someone thought up and now it's being passed around. It's not your fault if you believe this, because I've seen this repeated by the Discovery Channel. I've seen it on Animal Planet. I've seen it on Nat Geo. I've seen it appear at all kinds of newspaper articles and websites that are reputable. It's just something people like to add in there. The idea is that baby rattlesnakes are more dangerous than adults because the most common reason that people say this is because they don't have the experience yet to know how much venom to give you, right? Baby rattlesnakes on a predatory standpoint can change the amount of venom that they will deliver based on their experience with prey items. On a defensive standpoint, which is how a snake is going to bite you, there is no evidence to show that at all. And also there is lots of evidence to say that it doesn't happen at all. If you look up, there's a great video from on a video called the Venom Interviews. Look up Venom Interviews, venom metering. Look up that term on YouTube and you're going to see all kinds of great research on how this is not true, and other people that are more experienced than I am at this describing that myth and dispelling it. So also, a baby rattlesnake, even if it were true, it's got a head this big. It can only give you this much venom. The head of a baby rattlesnake can fit inside of a single venom gland of an adult of the same species. So the amount of venom that is potentially there, even if it always gave you all the venom that it had, is not comparable. So in no way, any case, is a baby rattlesnake more dangerous than adults. Okay, I have a few more questions. I'm going to ask if you have any more, if you could email them, it'd be great. I'm going to get through these last ones. I'm a dummy and was cooking some chili for lunch and burned hot pepper on the stove. So my throat is not great right now. So I can feel it to start to deteriorate after we're about 2 hours in. So I'm going to get through these other questions and then kind of wrap it up. So if you have any other questions, email them to me, it'd be great. I'm sure there's probably some that have been brought up while we're talking about this. One question tends to create more. So Tim is asking what to do if you walk up on a rattlesnake and starts rattling and you are close. Should you stand still or jump away? That is a great question. You should get away from it, and you should get away from it quickly. If a snake sees you and you're close and it's rattling at you, you're not fooling it by holding still or moving slowly. It's a pit viper. It can see your heat. It can see your presence. And if you're persisting, you're increasing your odds of being bitten. So if a rattlesnake is rattling and it's putting on a defensive display, it's not asking nice. It's saying, get away from me right now. So all you need to do is take one big step in any direction, except for onto the snake or over it, and you're safe. So if rattlesnake, you look down, there's a rattlesnake a foot away from your toes and it's rattling at you, get out of there, back up. You don't need to run, you know, get out of strike distance. The snake is not going to follow you. It's not going to chase you. But yeah, don't hold still. I'm going to add something to that too. There's an idea that I see a lot of times where people say, bring a hiking stick and knock it on the ground while you're hiking and beat the bushes as you go ahead of you. So all the snakes out in front of you will hear you coming or sense your vibrations and leave. It doesn't work at all. That's not how that works. So they can sense ground-borne vibrations and airborne vibrations to some degree, but they're not going to hear you and then leave. If anything, they're going to try to remain in place as their first line of defense, to stay hidden. There's some confirmation bias that happens there where people, you know, I've been doing that for 20 years and I've only seen a handful of rattlesnakes. Well, it's because they're doing that, so they're likely not looking for rattlesnakes as hard, so they're not seeing as many rattlesnakes, or they're seeing as many rattlesnakes as they would normally see anyway, but have a belief that it's less than that. I've tested that a lot of times. I actually have a video where I tested that I saw a rattlesnake. It was sleeping over there, and I went and jumped up and down on the ground just out of sight of it to see if I can get it to leave from 6 feet away, and of course it didn't. You can repeat that experiment as many times as you want. If anything, it would react to my movement or my heat, and that's not what happened. Okay. Oh, one more from Renee too. I didn't see. Do you ever tag snakes to follow them from research? Yes, I do. That's what I was doing this morning, and I actually found a Western Diamondback that I haven't seen for 2 years because of a pit tag that's injected into its body. So we are doing a study in the Phoenix Mountain Preserve to understand or better understand how rattlesnakes live in and around busy areas where there's lots of hikers and homes. The Phoenix Mountain Preserve, the short version of this, is a stable environment where there's no new real development happening. So what we learn there about how rattlesnakes are persisting and how they use yards and all that is stuff that's going to be transferable to Scottsdale and Cave Creek and Ahwatukee in 20 years when that solidifies and the development kind of ceases, or at least its older development. So I spend a lot of my time during the year looking for rattlesnakes in those areas. When we find a new one, it gets a pit tag so we can identify it later. Pit tag is a passive radio transmitter that's put into the body, so it has it forever, hopefully. So we can identify those snakes, find out what they're doing, and find out where they are. So there's a lot of stuff there, but yeah, I do that quite often. Mark is asking, how do you protect a yard gate? Gates are tricky because you still need to come down to the size that a baby rattlesnake can get into, which is 1/4 inch. We know that from testing with baby rattlesnakes. We took a sidewinder and bred it so that I had a fresh supply of brand new baby rattlesnakes, and then we saw what kinds of things they could fit through as a worst case scenario. Because if you're trying to protect your yard from rattlesnakes, you might as well do all rattlesnakes, not just the medium-sized ones, as my business partner Eric likes to say. You need 1/4 inch, which means that you need to have rigid surfaces. You don't put a sweep on it that goes down to the ground. You need to have a rigid surface that scissors close to another rigid surface. So we use a combination of steel plating and wire mesh and concrete. So if you want to see some pictures of that, go on our website. There's lots of that. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions. We just have a couple more. So Sarah's asking what to say when someone says rattlesnakes are the bad kinds of snakes. That's hard because you see, on Facebook, I see, what kind of snake is this? Oh, it's a good snake. Leave it there. It's a bad snake. Get rid of it. So I understand what people are saying there. And this is something that I think people that talk to people that don't like snakes about rattlesnakes, that you need to understand what the people are actually asking. And I see this a lot, and I think this is a big failure on the part of a lot of educators on rattlesnakes, is that if somebody is scared of snakes or wants to know something like, hey, is this venomous? They're not asking for a slew of information and snake facts about that snake. They're asking, is this a snake that can hurt my dog? Is this a snake that I should be concerned with? Should you be concerned with the gopher snake differently than you would be with a rattlesnake? Absolutely. So be careful when answering those questions, because if somebody is asking, if they're saying this is a good snake or a bad snake, that is a heavy thing, because yes, there is also the implied nature to that bad snakes should be killed and good snakes should be kept. But they're also asking, is this a snake I need to worry about, or is this a snake that I should leave here, right? So one of the things that I do is I try to work within those boundaries of what is this person asking, what are they really commenting on, and try to address that situation for that person within those rules of people that they don't know about snakes, and they don't need no love of snakes necessary, in my view, to appreciate them for what they are. An easy go-to about why do we need rattlesnakes, when people say, that the second part of that, we have bad snakes here, there will be, if you kill all of them, then there's going to be other types of snakes that can step in there and take care of that. First, that's not true at all. That's not the ecology of these animals. But ask them if they know anybody in the East Coast with Lyme disease. Lyme disease hurts more people than rattlesnakes ever will in the East Coast. I think in Massachusetts, the last rattlesnake fatality happened in the 1700s. I think I know that because there was another one that happened at some point here. But Lyme disease is a real problem. The explosion of Lyme disease in the East Coast and the Eastern United States has been shown to be directly correlated to the intentional extirpation of timber rattlesnakes. So you have an animal that is perceived to be dangerous and certainly has some dangerous quality to it and has killed some people. And the intentional eradication of that animal has created new problems, because rattlesnakes eat rodents and rodents have ticks on them. So the tick population exploded and all that kind of stuff. There is bubonic plague and hantavirus problems popping up in areas around Texas where there's lots of eradication of rattlesnakes. This is something I'm going to go out on a little limb and say, but if you look at the Department of Agriculture's guidelines on, or reports on, death of livestock, and they put out reports on this every year, of cattle and horses that are killed by different things. Rattlesnakes fall into this trace amount of animals that are actually shown to actually kill cows out there. It does happen, but not all that often. A lot of times people see a dead cow and, okay, this must be a rattlesnake. They don't know the cause of death of it. It's something else. The top reason why those animals are killed, by far, every year, many, many, many times more than predators, is accidental maiming from falling in rodent burrows. So in the act of killing all of the things that keep rodents in check, you could be killing more livestock. I would assume, I think that if someone were to look into that, they would find that to be the case. So the truth is that the perception of danger that rattlesnakes have in our culture and in the minds of people that want to do harm to a bad snake is not realistic compared to the good that they do as natural control for rodents and rodent-borne disease, and just appreciating them as part of our culture. So it's complicated, but the more you can work within the boundaries of the identity that person has as someone that is maybe even proud to say that they deal with bad snakes in a certain way, the more likely you are to address it, and not so much if you just start telling them information about snakes. So let's see if we have any more. Dave is asking, if we snake proof a property, do we just block off both side gates? If there are two, or will blocking one off be sufficient? You have to block off everything. It has to be a completely 100% secured enclosure, or else something's going to find it, and you could actually funnel them in. Vicky, you asked how to keep the dog safe. I answered that a lot earlier, so you might not have seen that, but I'm going to make a recording of this. The short version is to look for rattlesnake aversion training. Look up Rattlesnake Ready at rattlesnakeready.com. They do very good work at that. And Vicky is also asking if we have any recommendations for clothing. If you're a hiker and you have some clothing that you think might help protect from rattlesnakes, baggy snake fell over. Baggy pants can help increase your odds of that, just because a rattlesnake that tries to bite your leg could get a mouthful of cloth instead, and that's where a lot of that venom could end up. So There's certainly a lot more to talk about with rattlesnakes. This is something that if I were to get someone to take shifts, we could keep this going for a very long time. Each species of rattlesnake has its own very different and interesting natural history, and how those animals interact with homeowners and peoples in the community a whole, and really the whole idea of how rattlesnakes are in our culture. Those are all interesting topics that we're not going to get to today, but I am definitely going to be doing this again. Maybe I'll pick one topic and we'll do a Q&A on just that, or something. We'll figure it out. But thank you very, very much for the great questions. These types of questions are very important to me, because as someone that likes snakes, the things that I find interesting or relevant are always going to be different than the people that don't like them or even fear them or even hate them. And I think that those questions are the ones that are underrepresented and really need to be answered more. So I really appreciate your questions and your feedback. If you have more questions, which side? It's confusing. That's my email address. Email them to me, or even better, find us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. It's just facebook.com/snake removal. If you join that page, you're going to get a lot of information detailing every single thing we've talked about here. And there's just a lot of good discussion there. We have a Facebook group for snake identification, where people talk a lot about snakes. It's a lot more calm than a lot of the snake ID groups you're going to see. We just, it's Arizona based, and it's good stuff. We have some really knowledgeable people on there, and that is at facebook.com/groups/AZ snake ID. Obviously, a lot of our education events have been canceled this year, but I really like this format. So if you have any more questions, I look forward to reading them on those groups, and I will see you later. Thank you.